when the Arizona State Senate found out that I had that capability, they initially asked me to analyze the ballot images. Interesting enough, the company that was doing the audit, called 𝙒𝙪𝙤𝙤, gave us corrupted ballot images. The work we just completed just got accepted to 2 scientific symposium on forensic document examination. One of the journals we sent to, one of the leading journals, they were very afraid to publish our work. They said this was too political. It was fascinating. Okay. In fact, the Atlantic, which is a liberal left journal, and the LA Times have written 2 articles on this, both of which say that signature verification is a witchcraft. I created the system as we know it as email. Politicians in 1978 didn't even know what email was, so they didn't even have the laws so I could properly file a patent. I had to use copyright law.
Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. After a hiatus of a few years, I must say, I have the pleasure of company of Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. Now, you all know Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, and we are going to talk about a topic that we have not talked before. So let me introduce our guest of the day, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel.
Good to see you, Sri. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. And doctor, you've been hard at work doing something else other than all the different things that you've been doing before. So I was really, my curiosity was piqued when I saw that email from you from the Election Systems Integrity Institute about what kind of work you've done analyzing the signatures of the voters of the Maricopa County in Arizona. This is the 2020 election, but believe me, a lot of things are coming out, a lot of revelations. But first, let's just take a step back. Mail-in voting, right? All viewers, whether it is worldwide, they know that there is mail-in voting. And those of you who are from India, viewers, you know, mail-in voting in India is exclusively for government officials and military people who are not in their constituency to come to vote, and they can mail in their vote. But it is something that is selected where the identity is very clearly established. In other words, a common person cannot mail in their votes. However, in the United States, things have changed. And to walk us through all that stuff, I yield the floor to you, Dr. Ayyadurai. Please take it away.
Yeah, so Sri, you may remember I ran for United States Senate against Elizabeth Warren in 2018, and then I ran in the Republican primary for U.S. Senate. And if you came to Massachusetts in the primary, everyone knew our name, Dr. Shiva. You know, our name was out everywhere, every billboard. We had close to 20,000 lawn signs up. The Republican establishment ran a guy against me who no one even knew. And the word on the street on September 1st, which is when the primary day was Dr. Shiva was going to win. When I say Dr. Shiva, our whole movement, our campaign was going to win by a landslide. And at that point, when the results came in, we win in the predominantly hand counted, where they count the ballots by hand, in the county called Franklin County by 10 points. And every other county was 60-40, 60-40, 60-40, so on. And that led into my journey using all of my engineering systems training to really understand how the US voting systems worked. One of the first things we discovered around September 9th was, but there's a law called 52 U.S.C. 20701, which was passed around 50 years ago, and it was passed to encourage audits of elections 22 months after. So there's a congressman in the United States called 𝙒𝙗𝙗. Recently, he was attacking people saying you're un-American if you want to audit elections. The guy's frankly a fool because he claims he's a lawyer, but he doesn't understand the law. The law actually was passed by a Democratic majority to encourage audits. It was American to support audits. Okay, so he needs to go back to law school and study this. So what we discovered in Massachusetts was that they deleted ballot images. So the journey of a ballot, after it's opened from the envelope, it is imaged, and then the AI on the machines actually tabulates the votes, and where it has confusion, it goes to what's called adjudication. Well, so that was my journey. We understood it, as many people know, in September 2020, we led the movement against election fraud. In fact, we passed long before Trump got involved. In fact, we did the early research in Michigan and Arizona exposing what was going on. But anyway, fast forward to Arizona in late September, towards end of 2020, I was called and do some of the early analysis where we exposed some of the inconsistencies. And in 2021, I was asked to analyze the ballot images because, one of the companies I began was a company called 𝙒𝙦𝙦, which we grew to a very large company. We used to do all sorts of AI analysis. It's been my area of research since I was 14 years old, when I was doing analysis of sleep patterns, when I was creating the email system back in Rutgers Medical School, and came to MIT and did many, many different projects in pattern recognition, which is really the foundations of what we today call AI. And so 𝙒𝙦𝙦 was a company where we analyzed emails and images and all sorts of different things. So when the Arizona State Senate found out that I had that capability, they initially asked me to analyze the ballot images. Interesting enough, the company that was doing the audit, called Cyber Ninjas, gave us corrupted ballot images. Okay? And then it was only in December that we got the actual ballot images. Had we looked at the ballot images early, we could have saved them about $9 million. But I think these guys wanted to prolong the paper ballot stuff. Anyway, it was in November of last year, we also got something more interesting, the envelopes. So in Arizona, 92% of the voting in the largest county, Maricopa County, was done by mail-in ballots. So contrast that to a place like India, where maybe 0.5% of the votes were done by mail for military personnel or civil servants. But in Arizona, 92% were done by mail. Okay? So the question is, when someone sends a mail-in ballot, how do you know that person is the person who they say they are? For example, I own an ancestral home in India, and when I have to sign things, the Indian government literally they send me a video link, and I have to hold up my passport with my face, and my signature better match exactly, but they also get a video view of you, okay? So in the United States, in the case study of Maricopa County in Arizona, 1,911,918 ballots were mail-in ballots. Only about 165,000 were in-person voting. Okay, so just get that, just to sort of give you the perspective. When a ballot, and by the way, this is so what we did was, over the last 2 years, last year I launched a new venture, a research institute called the Election Systems Integrity Institute. Keyword is systems. Recognizing the entire voting process is a complex system, no different than an healthcare system, no different than an aeronautical system. And therefore, as a part of that, the goal was to recognize that in engineering systems, you're looking for anomalies, because you find those anomalies, you can create a better system. We know what happened with the space shuttle when Alan McDonald reported the O-rings were an anomaly. He was initially vilified and the space shuttle blew up. You may have said it's a little teeny weeny thing, but it's those little things that affect large scale systems. Engineers know this, politicians don't know this, lawyers don't know this. So in Maricopa, I was initially asked to analyze these envelopes, just to give you, and I'll show you some slides on this.
Yeah.
The ballot travels in its casing called an envelope. The envelope is a thing that has a signature on the outside, okay? And that signature needs to be verified before you open the envelope. So how do they do that signature verification, okay? So we'll talk about that. So first project we did, which we presented at the Arizona Senate, which is out on the internet, people can see, we were commissioned to simply get the envelopes and see if there was even a signature in the box. That was called signature presence detection. We found some very interesting anomalies, which got subsequently given to the Attorney General. After that, we wanted to do something more interesting, is literally compare a signature on the envelope to the signature on the file. So let me give you, and that resulted in a report we just filed. We did 2 reports, a pilot study and what is called an extended study. So let me share this here. This was the recent study. This was I'm going to give you a couple of slides from this. As you can see, this was called the extended study confirms at minimum over 200,000 mail ballots with mismatched signatures counted without review, and that process is called curing, okay? So to give you an idea what happens here in the overall process here, by the way, I'll come to this, but what we found was, and we did various scenarios of analysis, But even in the worst case scenario, 11.29% of those 1,911,918 should have been cured. They had mismatched signatures, 215,856. And again, we're taking the minimum, and there's various ranges. So we're taking the most conservative. So what happens here, just to understand, what is the signature verification process? So when someone votes, their ballot is in an envelope. The envelope is scanned and imaged into what's called a early voting ballot envelope image, okay? And there's one company in Maricopa, private company, which does this. All of those 1,911,918 envelopes were imaged. And what happens is there's an initial review that takes place using novices, what they call trained staff, volunteers. And they get about 2 hours of training. And what happens is literally they get a signature shown to them on the left, which is the signature extracted from the envelope. They literally look at a screen, and then they get the genuine signature, which is from the voter registration files or from their motor vehicle records. And that individual, the trained novice, has to make a decision, does this match this? They don't have access to anything else. And they get 4 to 30 seconds to do this. 4 seconds to 30 seconds. Okay? So the process is, in the initial review, the novices review it, as you can see here. If there is a match, then the envelope is opened, and then it's tabulated. If it is not a match, they do a second level of review with a manager in this initial review, who, if they also say, and this person has more expertise, by the way, they're not forensic document examiners, okay? And if they say it's also matched, then it goes to a process called curing. During curing, what happens is they contact the voter. They have bipartisan people review it. They may spend 3 to 5 minutes on this. If they find out after that it's still a no match, then it's designated a bad signature, okay? If it's a match, then it's opened, okay? Well, you can look at the results in Maricopa. Out of those 1,911,918 ballots, 25,000 were cured, which means went to this, which means they were signature mismatches, okay? Which is 1.31%. Out of the ones that went through curing, only 587 were found to have bad signatures, which is 0.03% of this, or 2.3% of the 25,000, okay? So I was very curious to understand. What we wanted to do is we wanted to find out what was going on. So first of all, I looked at the literature, in the science literature, to find out, has anyone in the world ever done a behavioral study, or what you call a actual scientific study? No one has done a study of this. That's what's even fascinating. There's a lot of studies done on, forensic document examination of questionable signatures. Now, in that case, a forensic document examiner has a questionable signature on one hand, but they have many, many, many genuine signatures. Like, for example, if someone contests a will. So they have the questionable signature, but they have access to the person who died's many, many signatures. So it's one to many they can compare. Even in the forensic document examiner, it's not like you only get 2 signatures, okay? And this is a new problem in the field called visual cognition. And this field is only about 10 years old. So I found it fascinating. No one had done a research project on the signature mismatch rates on ballots. And in fact, the work we just completed just got accepted to 2 scientific symposium on forensic document examination. One of the journals we sent to, one of the leading journals, they were very afraid to publish our work. They said this was too political. It was fascinating. So it turns out the mainstream academics are not doing any research on this, which is even more fascinating. One of the most important systems, the elite establishment, Stanford, MIT, Harvard, don't do anything on this, okay? In fact, The Atlantic, which is a liberal left journal, and the LA Times have written 2 articles on this, both of which say that signature verification is a witchcraft, calling it ridden with error. So even on the left, they consider this a black art, and the right doesn't like it. So this is a big elephant in the room. So when we did our audit, as you notice in the audit of 2000, there were all sorts of, there's 3 sides really to the audit. One is the people just deny there's a problem. Then there were grifters. People are throwing up all sorts of nonsense, making money off saying, oh, there's election fraud, etc. but they weren't really bringing up anything substantive. So the deniers could easily destroy them. And it almost makes you wonder, were these people created by the deniers? Because some of the outlandish claims that they were coming up with was nonsense, talking about bamboo paper and all this kind of stuff. But there are significant issues. One of them is signature verification. So what we did was out of those 1,911,918, which I think we're the only organization in the world which has the repository of such data, we selected 2,770 envelope signatures. We had done an earlier pilot study. We selected around 500, and we had found out that there was a mismatch rate of around 12%. But 500 out of 1.9 million is about a 95% confidence level. So in order to cut off our critics, we did a much larger study, which this would be close to 99% confidence. And so we had two groups of people, 3 trained novices who, as you're noticing here, were given 2,770 samples they had to look at. An image on the left, which was a genuine signature, the questionable signature from the envelope, and then the genuine signature. Now, the county of Maricopa didn't want to give us their signatures that they use for. So what we did was, we were very fortunate. We went and found a public repository of deeds when someone buys a home.
Yeah.
And those signatures, in fact, a higher quality because they're notarized.
Yes.
So we literally, as you're noticing here, we presented these signatures to the novices, the 3 novices, and the 3 forensic document examiners. So we had 2 different groups. Novices, representing what Maricopa County had their trained staff, and the managers represented by these 3 forensic document examiners. These are people who are brought into courtrooms to decide if a will is right, if someone murdered someone, right? That kind of stuff, okay? So we presented them, and they had only 2 choices, match or no match. And these were the results by the forensic document examiners, as you can see here. Okay, so you can see they were saying, it was a wide range from 12% mismatch all the way up to 66% mismatch. Remember, Maricopa only said 1.3% mismatch.
Right.
Okay, so you can see the samples we did, and these are the different sampling rates. Okay, then what we did was across all those 2,700 samples, every ballot. Remember, we have 3 people voting.
Yes.
So we literally did what's called simple thing that we calculated what's called a probability density function and did the averaging. So we found out 41.15% of the time, if you looked at every ballot, in one ballot, maybe 2 FDs were said it was mismatch, 1 FD said, no, it's not a mismatch. So if you do that entire density function, you find out 41% of an expert, 41.15% of experts would have said this signature mismatch rate, okay? That means if you multiply 41% by 1.9 million, that means nearly 786,000 ballots would have been mismatched, okay? Not
sorry to interrupt you, just 1 second. So all 3 were presented the same set of
yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, all 3 and so what every line here represents, so this line that goes up to 100% mean all believe that ballot number, whatever that was mismatch. If you see something at 0%, wherever you see the spacing, that means they thought that was a match, okay? And you have varying levels, okay? All right. So, but the bottom line is, if you look at all the experts, they would have flagged 786,000 signatures as not matching. Okay? All right. Then we did the same. That's a very high
number.
It's a very high number. But now we did the same with the novices, because that's who Maricopa uses.
Right.
And remember, the novices don't have as much of an eye, but they're at a lower rate, okay? 12.7, upwards of 21. And again, if you do the same thing here, see more of them they're saying are matches. And here you find out 18.02%. So that means in this case, 344,000 ballots should have been cured, which means they should have been sent to that curing process before they were opened and counted. All right. Now, we did something else. This is just if you just use novices, it would have been 344,000 ballots, the trained novices. If you use experts, it would have been close to 250,000. But in Maricopa, I remember in the initial review process, they'd initially have the novices review, And if they say something's a flag is a mismatch, then it gets sent to the experts. So that in probability, you would say two people have to both agree. That's a joint probability. Okay. So we simulated the same. And let me show you the results of that. Okay. So what we did here was we said, okay, what happens? And this is sort of, not to get too complicated, it's a two-step process. E represents all the 2,700. By the way, we threw out some ballots where we knew the genuine signatures didn't match, okay? Weren't the right one. So it's a little bit less. But anyway, you have all of these ballots coming in. And if alpha represents a mismatch rate of the trained staff, then E dot alpha is how many ballots make it out of the first level. Does that make sense? So that means these many people have said mismatch, the novices. This one then gets at the managers who have multiplied by their mismatch rate. And then this is what you would get, where gamma is alpha times beta, the mismatch rate of both.
Got it.
We literally calculated all of this. And what we ended up finding was you get this different profile. And this comes to 11.29%. So if you use this and this, the joint probability, you would find, again, being very, very conservative, you would find if both pairs of eyes looked at it, that means 11.29% of the 1.9 million ballots would have been mismatched, which means you would have found 215,000. Very, very conservative, okay? So what we have calculated, again, this is for the first time a study like this has ever been done. Everyone has said this signature verification is flawed. It doesn't make sense, but this is, in science, we want to know by how much, okay? And the how much is 11.29%. 215,856 ballots should have been cured, which means they should have gone to the next level before the ballots were opened. So that is the net of it. And so if you look at here are the three different scenarios that we have: 11.29%, 41%, 18%. Again, our study said even if you look at this, the worst case, 215,000 should have been cured. So anyway, Sri, we can bring. So that was the study that we just did. The important thing to understand is that when mail-in ballots first started, maybe like in India, right, it was only 0.5%, 2%, 3% of people. But now, over time, it's become 90% in the case of Arizona. So 90% are going through this mail-in ballot process. And the critical path of that is the decision if that ballot should be open if the signatures match. Okay? Now, in a case like Arizona, where the election was decided by 10,000 votes, and we're finding is 200,000 ballots weren't properly cured. And by the way, the curing process was something that the quote unquote the left wanted, because they were saying, hey, signature verification discriminates against poor people, against minorities, people who didn't learn how to write. So they may have varying types of signatures. So therefore, the compromise was we will have curing, where if it doesn't match, then we'll do a further review. We'll call them up on the phone. But now we're not having enough even being cured. Okay? So this is the first scientific study which has shown the actual percentage, which is 11.29%. So that's the critical point. And what's fascinating is, typically when, in the past, when I put something out, you typically have the left or the right attack you, right?
Yeah.
And what's been interesting on this, Sri, is crickets. Absolute silence. Because both parties are aware of this, the establishment wings, but they don't want to talk about this. In my view, when you look at this system like the O-ring and the space shuttle, the entire election systems in the United States has various points where there are leakages. One of them is the chain of custody. One of them is signature verification. One of them is the fact that AI systems are counting the votes. And I bet you if you ask 99.99% of the legislators in the United States don't even know what is a vote. Like how much of that circle has to be filled in for the AI to detect it as a vote. So we live in extraordinary times because these processes, systems processes are taking over the world, complex systems processes, but most politicians don't even know what a complex system is. So when the Election Systems Integrity Institute is hosted in our research center called the Center for Integrative Systems, which I started right after I left MIT because I felt there was a dearth of bottoms-up, broad understanding of systems. We live in a world of complex systems. And I know we'll talk about it in a follow-up video, that I've created an entire curriculum, which we teach people on the intersection of the systems of freedom, the intersections of science, truth, and the systems of health, truth, freedom, and health. And we live at a point now that all of these systems we live in are complex systems, integrative systems. In the old day, a car was just a car, or a telephone was a telephone. But this phone right now is a complex system. It's connected to GPS. It's connected to apps. You can be watched in different ways. When you drive with self-driving cars, a car is not just an individual car. You're part of a complex system. An election system is a complex system. And if politicians do not understand the nature of these complex systems, they're going to be 20 years behind. I talked about this when we talked about the invention of email many years ago. I created the system as we know it as email. Politicians in 1978 didn't even know what email was, so they didn't even have the laws so I could properly file a patent. I had to use copyright law. It was only in 1994 did politicians understand that software is a digital machine. And then they created the law for patents support. We're at that same point where politicians are 15 years behind, and they don't understand that the signature verification systems are completely flawed. Maricopa, in their manual, they boldly say that this is a rigorous verification system. So, one could argue that the many countries, quote unquote, developing nations and quote unquote third world countries, don't even allow, mail-in ballots. When you show up, you have to show your ID, you have to show your passport, you have to show multiple forms of ID to validate you're you. So in the field of what this is called identity science or object recognition matching, it's a very interesting field that the methodology that we're using is a novice who gets around 2 hours of training to 4 seconds to 30 seconds to decide if something is a match or a mismatch. So there you go.
Fascinating, Dr. Shiva. Now, I want to ask you, what are the next steps? I mean, you've definitely done all this work for a certain purpose. And what is that purpose, and where do you think the logical end lies?
Well, first of all, the essence of this is that mail-in ballots with the current signature verification model is flawed. And both left and right say this. So here's an opportunity to unite people versus pro-election fraud, anti-election fraud, right? This is a substantive big elephant in the room. So my view, as I mentioned to you many years ago, I think a couple of years ago, was that Election Day in the United States should be a holiday. It should be done in person, 99%, except perhaps you have disabled people who can't, they're overseas. The mail-in ballot process should be it shouldn't be 90%, okay? It should be a rare occasion when that's done. So that's a broad answer, what needs to be done. If people are going to do processes like these, then you need a very different signature verification model. I think I mentioned to you in India, when I had to sign one of my documents, I literally got a video link sent to me. I had to hold up my passport. They saw my picture. I had to hold up my signature. And I think that video was a 30-second video, it was an asynchronous thing. It wasn't real time. Someone probably looked at my picture. It was almost like they had me in person, right?
Right.
So, which is a pretty interesting model. So one could argue that obviously their places are perfect, but at least in that space, for the largest democracy on the planet, India, they at least, I think, have put some very clear bounds that they will not accept mail-in ballots. And if they do, it's very limited. And even in any of the signature processes India has on other documents, they make it very strict. And I think this is a very, very big area that needs to be fixed immediately if you're going to use mail-in ballots. Or the other opportunity is limit it and get rid of it, right? So that's my position on what needs to be done.
Absolutely, Dr. Shiva. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this. This is just the beginning of how this exercise is being held. We're not choosing any sides here. And we're just presenting the data as it comes. And we have to see what kind of corrective action, if any, will be taken. One question I have before we move on to the other topic, Dr. Shiva. What do you think of new technologies such as blockchain, where you can change your vote if you want to, as long as the identity is established correctly? Then everything is on a chain, and you can even enforce 100% voting. You can be anywhere you want, but you have to vote.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So if you look at blockchain, right, it is a function of, there's a cryptographic methodology that's used there, right? And I don't want to get into the details of it if we can.
Right.
But remember, one of the aspects of blockchain, and it's interesting because blockchain's taken off. You can do a lot of stuff, by the way, with relational databases, believe it or not, linked lists, which you can do in a very similar way, right? But blockchain's a big buzzword right now, and it's out there. However, it is based on a limiting factor that people can't break the cryptology, okay? Or the cryptography, okay?
Yeah.
But there's another technology that's going to be coming. It's called quantum computing, okay? When quantum computing comes, you'll be able to, it's going to be a game of computing versus the prime factorization problem, right? You're going to be able to break some of these things too, okay? Because you'll be able to do it. So whoever has a better computer may also be able to insert themselves and be able to play with these methodologies, you see? Or also break those prime factorizations. So right now we're basing it on a prime factorization model, and that's how the linked lists or whatever the chain is created.
Blockchain, right.
Yeah, but what happens, 10 years from now, you have computing that's on your desktop that anyone can start breaking these, anyone can start mining, etc., right?
You have a point, Dr. Shiva, but before somebody breaks into a voting system, your personal banking, such as buying from Amazon, online sales will all be broken first because there is immediate money there. So
right.
So you're right. Quantum.
Right. So what I'm saying is that I think ultimately the question that we need to ask is, this is actually a socio-technical systems problem. We tend to think that we just apply, faster, more powerful technology, and that's the solution to a problem. And that may not be the case. It may be the case sometimes the best technology is something called paper, something called in-person. That too is a technology.
That's right.
I think what's happening is the people who are making these decisions about what technology should be used are technocrats. And the technocracy model may not be taking into account these other human factors that should also be counted. And it could actually be potentially cheaper, faster. Look, Brexit, that entire vote was done by, they did it in a few hours. Right. So there's nothing saying that paper is bad, and paper may have, maybe paper and you scan it and you put it up online so everyone gets the ballots and everyone could run their own systems to verify votes. So I'm not a proponent of thinking you just throw technology at something or whatever they call technology, right? Basically faster computing, because the issue is who now controls that, right? So I can tell you right now, we did another project in Maricopa where we analyzed the ballot images. And what we found there was that the AI on the machines is deciding, so let's say there's Trump, Biden, and Jorgensen. Let's say Trump's circle was filled at 90% and there was a little 2 specks on Biden and Jorgensen. That what is deciding if that's a vote or an overvote or an undervote, it's called.
Right.
So the machine is deciding, but do the legislators even know what the machine was programmed into? And this is something no legislator knows. So we sit on this very interesting point that I bet you, again, if you asked in the old days, there were very clear standards. Okay, you had to circle that vote in. If it was 50%, it's not a vote. You say the actual pencil or pen circling in. The machines are making those decisions. They could be doing them right, but you could have the O-ring situation where you're allowing a machine. And we noticed this where there were votes when we analyzed all the 1.9 million ballot images, that there were cases where there was a vote assigned for Biden. The machine said in the flag is vote, but later on, someone decides to take it and adjudicate it and assign it to Trump. How did that happen? What were the guidelines that allowed them to do that? And I don't think any of the legislators know this. There were anomalies like this. So the bottom line is we're outsourcing our decision-making to machines, robots, which are owned by private companies. And if you're going to do that, the legislators should say, no, we own that robot, just like we used to own people who are doing these. And these are the standards. Those standards don't exist that are in bills, in actual laws on how much, what is a vote. So that's another emergent piece that we noticed.
So I think in a sense, what we are saying is vote in person, manual count. Then there's
I
at
think,
least.
yeah. I mean, they've done this. I mean, it isn't that hard when you have local. And my views, Election Day, which I said 2 years ago, should be a national holiday, and
Yes.
young people should participate in this counting. They should see how this works. I mean, the fact that we're moving, just vote, send it in on a mail, and something happens. It's showing that you're in some ways denigrating the democratic, or the honoring the democratic process. That's what I think is happening.
Thank you so much. I think we've got a very fascinating study here. We'll wait and see how things play out. Thank you very much, Dr. Shiva. And
You're
we'll be
welcome.
back again, viewers, with more such informative talks with Dr. Shiva. Thank you, sir.